Two disasters for those whose original home was India. Partition 75 years ago and the expulsion of East African Asians from Uganda 50 years ago. Two disasters, and yet today we're celebrating. We'll tell you why in just a moment. You're watching Roundtable. Very good to have your company. I'm David Foster. Celebrating, yes, we are celebrating the art and influences of South Asian culture here in the UK. And we have some celebrated artists here on Roundtable to take us on a journey. Time to get a little bit beneath the surface on this. I'm joined in the studio by Osman Yousefzada. Describes himself as an interdisciplinary artist who's got an exhibition at the V&A in London responding to the 75th anniversary. Across London, Sanjukta Ghosh, Honorary Artistic Director at the School of Oriental and African Studies, that's SOAS, and she recently put together an exhibition on what was described as narratives of refugee memories. That's on India at 75 and Uganda at 50. In Madrid, we welcome Faisal Hussein, artist and creative producer, currently exhibiting in Berlin and Birmingham Museum on decolonization and migration. You see, it is a big cross-section, and we go to Birmingham and say hello to Mariam Waheed, artist and photographer who went on a journey to Pakistan in 2019 to find out more about her mother and grandmother's roots. Great to have you all here. A lot to get through. And Mariam, I'm going to come to you first. I described it as a journey, and we're going to see a little bit of a film in just a moment that you made about this. But tell me, were you going back to Pakistan to imagine what life must have been like for your ancestors?
Yeah, that's correct. I think part of the journey was to really imagine what my life could have looked like if my family didn't move to the UK. So I am second generational British Asian. My grandfather arrived in Birmingham in like mid 60s and worked in factories and lived here since. So I grew up actually never visiting Pakistan until 2019. But obviously growing up as a British Asian, you're taught so much about the culture through the food that you cook at home, through the language you speak with your parents, and there's always a real great present connection always in your life that's reminding you you have an Asianness to you. So, and
the film is Zebunisa. That's your mother's name. She hadn't been home, if you want to call Pakistan home, still for a quarter of a century. This was your first trip there. Let's have a little bit of a look at how you began.
Before going out to Pakistan and when I was kind of initially getting my head around how Zebunisa will be shot and what will it be about, one of the things that really spoke to me were these pictures that I would see of my mum in her home and of her family members in this home, of my Nana Boo in on the Pakistani bed sitting there playing a little doll. I wanted to know what was that space like in person, but what is going on around that picture as well, what is going on behind the picture maybe. I wanted to go back and really visit those places and see what's changed and wanted to see how that impacted me today as somebody who has had no connection to Pakistan and as somebody who has had no connection with grandparents.
And of course, you took some pictures while you were there. We're going to see some of those now. The ones I'm interested in particular, here's Zebunisa, your mum, and I know you've just sent her upstairs so she doesn't interrupt the interview. She will be watching this later on, and here she is at the border between India and Pakistan. What did that mean to her?
I think it was for both of us. We felt a real loss being there. We didn't feel like we belonged in Pakistan, and living in the UK, we knew what the effect that partition had on our families from India to Pakistan, and then Pakistan, we've come to the UK. So there was a great loss and almost a feeling of mourning there, which is quite sad, really. And although it's a very there's a lot of celebration that goes on at the kind of Wagah border, we didn't feel that way. So yeah, that's what I tried to capture in the pictures. And I took obviously a body of images out there. to really capture my experience.
Mariam, this is interesting. We're going to come to this a little bit later because it's a story of what you imagine life might have been like for you. But Sanjukta, I want to come to you first of all. Mariam was talking about the fact that this was about shedding the past, but also carrying it with you. And you've recently put together an exhibition that includes photographs by a number of different people. This one here, where we can see the suitcase, refers to the expulsion from Uganda in 1972 of countless Asian, East African Asians, as they were sometimes described, who had to relocate to Britain. Why is the suitcase quite evocative in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, this particular suitcase belongs to Chandrika Chandarana, and she apparently was carrying this suitcase, holding on to that airline sticker. And that seemed like a very interesting label on the suitcase. You know, you would have dusted, cleaned, and kept it away, but you're still holding on to that moment of journey from Uganda and keeping that all along. You haven't actually thrown that sticker away.
Well, for those with good eyesight, I think the sticker says East African Airlines.
It does say that. And it's just about the suitcase is a personal belonging, which is again very universal in terms of a symbolic value for everyone who's carrying things. And putting everything in one box and leaving your home behind. So it's, again, something that everybody carried. And in the exhibition, we've tried to show different objects that mattered to people and what they could have possibly carried.
Behind me, we see a kite and we see a woman sitting on a bench. Now, these are by Kamal Correa, and I want you to explain to me what they meant to Kamal. What does the kite symbolize?
The kite, again, you know, Kamal is an artist who settled here in the UK for a long period of time. And he's one artist who is trying to apply a very different context to things that are very familiar to him. So objects that are known in India to him, for instance, kite flying is an occupation that a lot of young boys like to do. And kite means it's a symbol of freedom. So the way this painting tries to show is the kite can fly anywhere. It can settle anywhere. It's kind of borderless. And you create a different kind of life where you actually get settled. So that's something the kite symbolizes in my mind, freedom with no borders, flying and settling anywhere.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll come back in just a moment. I want to introduce everybody as quickly as possible. Osman Youssef Zada. I'm going to embarrass you a little bit by saying you were once a fashion designer. You made a jumpsuit for Beyonce. That is over because you want to talk about the other work. The other work.
We can talk about Beyonce if you want to.
No, because we're talking about the art that you do now. And I'd like to just take a little look at what you call performance art, which has been staged at the Victoria and Albert, the V&A. And the exhibition's up till September the 25th?
Yeah.
Let's have a look. And that is just a little clip from, I think it's about a 6 or 7 minute performance, maybe even
It's a 10-minute performance.
10-minute performance. It's extraordinary, just the 3 artists involved.
Yeah, there's 3 performers involved in that. It's actually...
what was it trying to say?
It's the words of the mystic, Sultan Bahu. And it's a very kind of... It's a reimagination of a very popular song, which is called Alaf Chambe Da Boota. Alaf Allah Chambe Da Boota, which is my Lord has actually planted a fragrant seed in my soul. So it's this kind of real idea of space and how you move through space and new beginnings. So it's sort of very pertinent for Pakistan to some extent.
And actually, the water that they were dancing in or moving in, I won't say dancing, because I don't think you like that idea.
So
the water means what and the colours mean what?
So Pakistan had a very violent birth in some respects. It's not necessarily the water's breaking, but it's this idea that there's a boat actually displaced off the lake, and the whole of the performance is across these banners and these textile works. And so it's a physical kind of performance of really the work. They come out of part of the interventions and installations, and then they actually move through the space. It's, you know, I mean, people are interacting with the work which is outside in the Majeski Gardens in the courtyard, but I really wanted to actually have another narrative, another layer of meaning to it as well.
Shall we save some of your other works till a little bit later in the programme? Faisal, you're in Madrid, but I know Birmingham is home territory for you. I think you've got an exhibition up there at the moment. Do you want to tell us about it?
Yes, I'm currently exhibiting at the MAC in Birmingham. That exhibition is a commission in response to the Commonwealth and Bristol Archives. Bristol Archives have been exhibited, and parts of the archive have been selected by a variety of different academics and different people. Our work, my work, Carla Busatil and Mehtab Hussein's, are to do with, I suppose, responses to what the Commonwealth is.
And does it differ very much from what we've seen with the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, which was almost a glorification of the different countries? Does it tell a story of oppression? What?
So I think what it does is it responds and contextualizes kind of history to do with the Commonwealth, as well as the celebrations that are kind of always associated to it.
Let's take a look at three works of art that you've sent to us, and we'll begin with the signpost, because I think you say this is a way that immigrants actually got themselves noticed, if you like. We are here because you were there. What does that mean?
So this is actually a quote by an activist named Sivanandan. It was an aphorism that he used to respond to racists when, I suppose, we were asked why we were here, where we had come from, why we had come here. The reason that I've used shop signs is to do with the fact that I think this is how people, or this is how migrants introduce themselves to each other. They introduce themselves to, I suppose, what it is to be in a country and live in a country, because it's about survival. And you have to get on with certain things. And those signs of our shops and of the places that we worked, I thought were quite beautiful and quite interesting, especially as though whenever you go around the world, you can kind of notice and understand what certain people are saying and doing and what backgrounds they're from by sometimes the things that they're selling. So the signage was meant to be a kind of vehicle to be able to say some of the things, like Sivanandan has said, that we are here because you were there, but they also include different contexts and different things, like see it, say it, racist.
And we must not be extreme, which is another one we have here.
Yes, we must not be extreme is part of my Suspect Subjects exhibition, which looked at the implications of Islamophobia over a variety of different subject matters, cases, that came about in 2017. We must not be extreme is almost a response to the extremist kind of narrative, or the terrorist narrative, that is often pushed by different governments and different media outlets. And it was a kind of tongue-in-cheek response to say that no, we must, somehow that we are this kind of suspect community that mustn't be extreme, that has to conform. And that piece is currently on at Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery as part of its reopening.
Mariam, and I'll come to you in a moment, Sanjukta, but I want to ask you, Mariam, first of all, I saw both of you nodding in agreement with some of what you heard there from Faisal, particularly about the signposting, Mariam.
Yes, I mean, I think certainly migrants are settled in certain parts of the city, and one of the things that really kind of inspired my work was to talk about my heritage and focus on that, because the only way I really found out about my identity and my heritage was at home through family stories, but also through my family album and from my community. So you don't really get the opportunity to learn about migration in school. and you're kind of just in a society of people where you can really learn from each other and learn, how we migrated, how we settled here. So yeah.
Sanjukta, tell me a little bit about whether you feel there needs to be a political element because of the history of India and Pakistan, whether it's part of the narrative that has to be told almost every time?
Well, I think yes. I mean, artists here are, they're very much conscious that a socio-political story needs to come out. And I feel that's something I've used in the exhibition to punctuate what has been found in the archives with what is actually also happening in present times. So it's to connect the past with the present. I've tried to use images and pictures of what the artists have painted or are showing as artifacts or material artifacts with what is past in archives. So how does the archive speak to present forms of art is something that interested me, and that's something that comes out in the exhibition as well.
Okay.
And that consciousness
sorry,
works.
do carry on.
And that consciousness you can find in the work of Amarjit Nandra, for instance, that is on display. And there is an image that I have sent, which is Displacement. And that really talks about how her own work in relation to textile is displaced as an art form, just as she tries to capture displacement of partition.
I'm going to bring in Osman here, if I may, just because time is our enemy. Your parents came here, they had very little. Your mother passed away, I think it was earlier this year. And going through her belongings, if I'm not being too personal, you found lots of plastic bags in which she kept things that she never wanted anybody else to see, but they were probably from her homeland. You've now turned them into a work of art, if you like. I found this absolutely fascinating. You've turned plastic bags into casts. You still don't know what is inside them.
I think it was I think once you come from one particular space and you come from a rural kind of setting where there aren't any wardrobes, how you navigate space, and you come to another space and you have different architecture or spatial architecture, it's how do you kind of create agency within that environment, basically. And I think that's something which I've always was not necessarily puzzled, but quite intrigued by my mum throughout her growing up. She basically
Was
kept
it also
everything.
because she felt perhaps an impermanence, having been...
No, it's definitely. We grew up thinking, we're told by our parents that they're going to send you back home. We're not going to be actually...
So she was packed and ready to go.
Well, I think it was that, and also actually taking ownership of space within a communal house, which was like a female, in a predominantly a patriarchal space. And so it's actually trying to carve out your own space. So no one can look, those knots become your locks and keys. So no one can look through your stuff. So it was this kind of idea of actually marking out territory, really.
And do you want to tell us about the stools? That's what I call
Yeah.
them. You call them piris. Distinctive colours, distinctive shapes.
Yeah, I mean, I think these are, when I went back to Pakistan as a kid, these were actually the colours of the doors in the rural areas that they painted. So these are a kind of like a tetrix type of structure, which you can, as you use it, it dissipates into the environment. And
This is actually outside the V&A, isn't it?
Yeah, it's in the courtyard of the V&A. So it's basically a stool structure, and then you put it back. It's like a stackable chair, but in a way it creates a kind of like a Kaaba-like cubist structure. So you take it away and it disappears, and then you actually put it back, and it reveals itself.
Your mother, as I mentioned, died just a few months ago. You've been an artist for quite a few years. What did she make of the fact that you'd chosen this as a way to live? Was she proud? Was she disapproving? Was she worried?
Well, I don't think they really knew what art was, basically. I mean, I think that art is quite an elitist idea of spending time or pontificating.
A luxury, as far as...
It is a luxury, most definitely. I mean, I come from a generation of craftspeople. So my mum was a seamstress, my dad's a carpenter, both illiterate. They kind of came over to this country. So in a way that what was quite interesting was when I took my mum to a show I had at the Icon Gallery, and I made a kind of like a version of her space, basically, and I put a bed in there, a lot of post-war furniture, where the kind of type of furniture when they came to in this country. And she asked, who sleeps there? So this notion of like, I had the luxury, I had the privilege that someone had given me this in one generation to be able to...
You thought it had to be used?
She had to be used. Someone had to sleep there. There's many homeless people on the streets outside, and this idea of a safe space, a bed to be used, was actually really paramount.
And what were you trying to say?
I, including the book that I wrote, it's really about sort of documenting communities that don't want to be documented, closed communities, and especially women whose stories, like my mother's, aren't really put to the forefront. You know, so it's really about having those type of conversations.
Mariam, I want to ask you about the picture I referred to earlier on. Girl on a motorcycle. You're back in Pakistan. You're not in the driving seat. Were you imagining what life might be like had you been born somewhere different?
Absolutely. I think what Osman's just referred to, you know, really thinking about what my mother's life was like growing up and what her mother's life was like growing up, you know, and my life, comparing that directly. I mean, my life is drastically different. So I'm no longer in the driver's seat. I'm a passenger, and there was many things that I would see. I mean, I'm not kind of setting a stereotype of all the women being like this. For me, it was looking at women in my family and making that direct comparison. And, you know, women in my family, because of the partition, you know, now live in Lahore. You know, now, you know, husbands and dads are struggling to make an income in Lahore. So, you know, it was really understanding, you know, the status as well, what life would have been like in that way as well.
Faisal, a picture that fascinated me, I want your interpretation of it. It looks like 4 people standing on a very small wedding cake. It could even be a piece of computer with a couple of USB ports on it. One in a smart suit, one in traditional dress, a woman in a haddour. I can't see the person at the back. What were you trying to say with this?
So I think this work is actually called Muslim Stereotypes. Well, I know it's called Muslim Stereotypes. It's a reference to how, I suppose, we fulfill certain roles and stereotypes within media coming from either a South Asian or Muslim background, and that these modes are constantly wheeled out as the epitome of who we are and where we are from, whereas actually, just as has been said, we are a variety of different mixtures, identities, and experiences. And therefore, I wanted to, I suppose, create a piece of work that looked at the fact that these things were kind of wheeled out constantly, and that the variation of who we are and what we are is so vibrant and so amazing that we can describe ourselves in a variety of plural ways.
I've already got the answer from you, Osman, about what your antecedents would make of what you're doing. You said they wouldn't really understand it. We've only got a minute or so to go. Let me ask you, first of all, Mariam, if I may, what would your grandmother have made of, in fact, we can see a picture of you looking at her on a wall in Pakistan. What would she have made of what you do, if not for a living, but for love?
I think she would have been so proud and so moved. And I know this because when my mum sees what I do and she supports me and my sisters unconditionally, the one thing she always says is if my mother could see what her daughters are achieving in Britain and you know how they are working and they are, you know, basically independent, she would be so proud, and it would be such a moving thing for her to discover. So I think that also motivates me, knowing what my kind of grandmothers and great grandmothers would think of what I do as a British Asian artist.
Senjukta, what do you think? Have times changed that there would be pretty much pride all around rather than a little bit of people feeling this is not the traditional way we do things?
I think times are changing, and these kind of exhibitions and installations that we can see is increasingly focused on, you know, the agency of the migrant. And therefore, I feel that I don't think we are stagnating, but we should work towards bringing out those marginalized voices as they used to be before.
It's been an extraordinary journey, not just for your parents, your grandparents, but for all 4 of you, I think. Thank you so much for coming in. V&A till September the 25th. Quick shout out for where you're exhibiting. Mariam?
Oh yeah, I've got some of my Zebanissa pictures being shown at King's Cross area in a public display.
Faisal, it's got to be quick.
Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery in the MAC till September, and Berlin till 2024.
And Sanjuk, to the work that you're doing and the other artists you support.
There's the exhibitions running in the SOAS Library till the 22nd of August, and the Ugandan Asian migration story is running in various venues.
I've put the word out for all four of you. Thank you very, very much indeed. It is your job now to go out and say what a wonderful programme Round Table is, and if you want to come on it, then just give us a call. Listen, thank you so much. It's been absolutely fascinating. I always say thank you very much indeed, wherever you happen to be watching this. We mean it most sincerely. It's been an absolutely extraordinary programme. From me, David Foster, and the Round Table team, goodbye for now.